What's good, SRL race fans? 'Tis I, Justin, with the NRN, the Noble Racing Network, and today was the final race of the SRL season. Season 3 came to a close this afternoon from the Brazilian Grand Prix. Of course, last weekend, Barcadelta wrapped up the championship, but we still had one race to settle and one win left to grab. So who would walk off with that final win? Well, in qualifying, Cameron Weston Edwards would have to start at the rear for a penalty, and he was going to have his work cut out for him. But as someone mentioned in the chat, and I do agree with this too, you know, he just goes hard all the time when he's driving, so I had a feeling we would see him at the front at some point during the race, and boy, it did not disappoint. But qualifying was great. Jesper Leppänen, he grabbed the pole in just the last little bit over Lewis Marshall, just 1/10 of a second, so I already knew we were going to have a really good race in our hands just based off of qualifying. But Jesper Leppänen, he would start on the pole, Lewis Marshall would start to his outside. It was a really good, clean start to the race. Jesper was able to hold off Lewis Marshall in his early attacks for the lead. The only incident happening to Colin Higgins, who sustained some damage on the opening lap. Marusic ran Higgins off the track just a tad, and a lap later, Colin Higgins and Louis Quinlan would tangle, and they would crash as well. So they were not off to a really great start in this one, but up front, it was a three-car battle for the lead. Jesper was still leading Lewis, but Van Gelder was in third, and Van Gelder made a bold move to the outside of Marshall, and he absolutely lost the car. He'd spin around and lose several positions, and then the unthinkable Jesper would spin at the end of the lap, and he'd go off the racetrack. He'd lose several spots, including the lead, and Lewis Marshall would assume the race lead over him. That was, that's a pretty easy pass right there when they just spin out in front of you and you just go on by. It's just like, well, I'll see you later then. With all the craziness going on, Cameron Weston Edwards and Francis McGinn had worked their way from the back up to 4th and 5th. Absolutely amazing. Van der Stapp and Sandra Doulis were behind Marshall for those podium spots, so that was where everyone was running early in the race. Ethan Croft would end his season, though, when he'd get in the wall on lap 8. That crash would put him out of the race, and that was not the way Croft wanted to end his season, I am sure. The very next lap, though, Van Gelder would spin again and would be forced to pit for new tires. Fox in the commentary, he believed that Van Gelder abuses those tires, and you know what? I'm inclined to agree with him. It seems like he just runs those tires ragged and loses so much grip during the race. Marusic would crash coming off the pit lane, and this was a bit of a weird incident. His tire would come flying off the car, and his tire would beat him down the straightaway, but Marusic would then end his day as well. Lap 13, most of the leaders had made stops, which put Cameron Weston Edwards at the front with McGinn behind him, and those two had one hell of a battle going on out there for the lead, with Edwards eventually getting that lead. So it was from the back to the front for those two guys, and like I said, you just knew they'd be up there. Two very talented drivers like that. Edwards would pit, and McGinn would assume the lead, and he would be on the medium tire. So how long would he stay out there? With just a few more laps after that. And after all those pit stops had cycled back around, Lewis Marshall would again take over the lead of the race. But where the excitement was on the track was between Edwards and McGinn, who battled for several laps with side-by-side racing, even sometimes banging tires a little bit. And I don't know how he does it, but Edwards held off McGinn and Van Gelder, who eventually got into that race each and every lap. It was absolutely amazing racing, and I was grinning from ear to ear watching all of that action, so thank you for that show. Lap 22, our pole sitter was still having problems. Jesper would spin again from 4th place, and his day was getting much worse. But that battle between Edwards and Van Gelder and McGinn continued, and was by far the best racing out there on the racetrack. They ran all into one another, and finally, Van Gelder would get into Edwards, who does a Dale Earnhardt-like move across the grass, and McGinn would win that battle for the meanwhile. But for Cameron Weston Edwards to fight like he did and make his car as wide as he did, that's going to earn that man the Noble Driver of the Race. I'm not even going to wait till the end of the recap to hand it out. I'm just going to go ahead and hand it out right now, because great driving to Cameron Weston Edwards, who held off two cars for multiple laps and drove the car to his outside that entire time basically, never cracked under pressure, kept it going. Even when he had the contact, he drove through the grass, got back on the racetrack, and kept his car going. So Cameron Western Edwards receives the No Bull Driver of the Race. Fantastic. Just absolutely fantastic. And sir, I'm giving you an open invitation if you ever want to come on the show for an interview. You just let me know, buddy. You just let me know. By the way, Van Gelder went off the racetrack during all that, and he took off across the grass. In fact, I thought he was going into another universe. He took off so quick, but he would continue on until his day would eventually end when he smashed into the wall trying to get into the pits. A little overzealous there. That would wreck him out of the race. And then rain would start to fall on lap 26, which, you know, for Interlagos is commonplace. And finally, towards the end of the race there, with the last 10 or so laps, it would start to rain and we'd have a damp track. But then, huge crash for our pole sitter. Just when you thought his day couldn't get any worse, well, you'd be wrong. It got worse. He would crash, and he would end up upside down, and that would end the day for Jesper Lepinen, our pole sitter. Anyway, up front, Lewis Marshall would hang on to win in the rain at Brazil. Great race for him. Started second and would stay out front to win the race. Van der Staap would finish in second place, and Sandro Dulis would have a great run, finishing third in his Ferrari. 2 Mercedes and a Ferrari on the podium. Not like to see that all the time, right? That would be your podium finishers there. Francis McGinn would finish in 4th. Cameron Weston Edwards would finish 5th. Louis Quinlan would finish 6th. Dion Stahl with a very quiet race. He would finish in 7th. Higgins grabs 8th. Our pole sitter would finish 9th. Ben Gelder would finish 10th. That would be the top 10 finishers of the final SRL race of Season 3. Sad to see the season go. Sad to see that it's over. SRL, though, will be back for Season 4. Bart Cadelda is the champion of this year, but who will win next year now that he's leaving? I don't know. Lewis Marshall has had some strong runs in the last 2 races, winning those. He could do it. What about Van der Staap, who's very consistent? Maybe Sandro Dulis, those guys that we saw on the podium today. Those guys have been having very consistent and strong runs over the last couple of weeks, so maybe one of those could carry over and have that success next season. I do want to let you know that SRL is having a very special race next Saturday, the SRL Indy 500. That will be next Saturday, so tune in to SRL League F1 for all of that coverage, and tune in to NRN after the race for the recap. As always, I'm Justin with NRN, the No Bull Racing Network. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening, and I will see you next week. Take it easy.